Hey everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. I have another food video for you. I managed to get those two days apart and then have fallen behind again, but I have another food video. It rained for a couple of days, which always makes it hard for me to do these voiceovers, just because there's a lot to do, but to get out into the garden space here until we have that other section built. But the roof leaks over my kitchen, so we had temporary, marquee type structures as the extra roof for the kitchen, and then we covered them in plastic, what do you call them, like cafe blinds, so they were waterproofed over the canvas. And of course they're not really supposed to be under that much UV for that period of time, so they started cracking and they started leaking. We bought the new roofing for the kitchen. We have it, the metal roofing. We just have to get the posts now to be able to do that, but we also need to pull up the floor. And anyway, it's all cascades into a big job. So when it's raining, hard to get anything done. That's basically what that squirrel was entirely could have been wrapped up in a few different words. Regardless, I got some notes done for a video while it was raining, and now I'm out here to film it. This weekend just gone, so it's Monday at the moment, so the weekend just gone was our 6-year anniversary of being on the property, which is pretty amazing. I put a post of a little clip of Apollo when we first moved out, who had obviously taken my phone and I didn't realize it, and just taking little videos of himself. It was so cute. I should put that up here I'll put it right here. I'll put the little clip right here, so that everyone who doesn't follow on Facebook and they can see it, put it here.
Hey guys. Hi. Well, today we're kind of gonna be doing stuff, but we need to...
So that was awesome to find on my phone, and I found a few other bits and pieces. Now, I was going to try and do a live and things like that, but I'm apprehensive about doing a live. It is so hard to... Everyone who films when you're not doing it live, you curate it to a degree. Of course you do, because no different than cleaning up, tidying up before someone comes to visit. And on a live, I don't feel comfortable, because the children coming in and out and the things that I just don't feel comfortable with it. And I know that sort of says something about our household, because if our household was perfect, then I'd feel comfortable about it. But obviously it's not, so I don't. But what I think I might do is do up a little bit of a story time type video again because now that we're hitting the 6 years, the last one I did was when we were 4 years, so that was 2 years ago, which is just like amazing. I cannot just fathom the fact that the last one I did was for 4 years. So I might do a bit of a FAQ type thing with that for anyone new who hasn't had any questions answered. So I'll put up a community post, but on the bottom of this video, anyone who's watching, feel free to put some questions and I will write them down as well and try and cover as much as I can. I always say that I will refrain from answering anything that I'm just not comfortable answering, but I try and be as transparent as possible, and that's part of what this channel is. You know, I get a lot of negative comments about the state of the property and all that sort of stuff, but the whole point is that I'm being transparent about the fact that we are a very limited income family with 6 small children who are trying to build a life. So with that, and with the way the life started, that's just what happens. But anyway, we will go into that on the other video. This is a food video. I just wanted to put that little thing there so that people could put any questions that I haven't answered recently up, and or anyone who's new. And we'll get into this food video, and then I will film that one sometime during this week. So just get back to me when you can. And that'll be celebrating our 6 years, which again, it's amazing how far we've come and yet how much further we have to go. So let's get into the food video. This, I think, is part 6, maybe, of the food prep, planning and preserving video post our 2 monthly grocery haul that occurred at the end of April. As the weather cools down, we change our style of eating. So in summer and that, we have a lot of flatbreads with salads and grilled meats and things like that. And in winter, we tend to have more hearty meals, risottos and pastas and soups and things like that. And each time at the change of seasons, I kind of forget that a little bit. So like we are running low on dried pasta for this shopping trip, because I only bought our normal amount, but we're eating a lot more pasta because it's winter and things like that. So it was a cold day today, and I had discovered some small chilies and all the basil in the garden that was ready to be used. So I was looking to make the Quirky's lemon coconut chicken soup. Quirky Cooking is a website. If you search it, she does Thermomix type style stuff, but whole foods and stuff like that. I normally make this in the Thermomix, but I was running the air fryer to cook the chicken, and I can't run them both at the same time. There's pros and cons to that. I'm always a little less precise when doing it on the stove, whereas I tend to follow the weights and stuff a lot more in the Thermomix because the scales are built into the Thermomix as you're pouring in, whereas I'm not going to pre-weigh things to put in a pot, I just toss it in. I cut up some chili and some basil really nice and fine. I mixed some vegeta with water in a jar so I had some stock to use because I didn't have any stock on my shelves, and sliced up some of the elephant garlic as well. I heated some oil in the pan and I cooked off some ginger along with the chili and the garlic briefly before adding the jar of stock. We don't really want too much colour on this because it's a fairly clear soup, so if you've got burnt onions or garlics or whatever in there, then it's going to look like little black flecks floating in your soup. I brought it up to a simmer and then added a tin of coconut cream. Now, this soup is really thin. It's more of a broth or a drinking soup, and I quite often make it in a small batch just for Darryl and I. Haven't really made it for the kids before. So I was contemplating while I was cooking it what I was going to do because I don't think the kids would appreciate it the same way as Darryl and I do. I added some turmeric and brought it up to a simmer to let all those flavours meld. And then I pulled the whole boneless chook out of the air fryer. So these have proven to be a really good way for us to buy chicken. On sale or at Aldi, they are about $10 each for about a kilo of a whole boneless chicken. So it's a whole chicken that's been deboned. They have been welcome in our food making and meal prep and stuff this month. I'll definitely be buying many of these each shopping trip because the cost per kilo of the meat is quite good for chicken, and it's already pre-marinated. But one of the big things is that it's vacuum sealed into these bags, or well, sealed into these bags, and it means that as soon as I get home and start unpacking all the groceries and stuff, I can just throw them straight into the freezer. I don't have to worry about anything to do with like bagging them up or rebagging them or vacuum sealing them or anything like that. They can just go straight in the freezer nice and flat, and then when I'm ready to cook them, all I have to do is put them in the fridge to defrost. Because they're a split chicken too and deboned, they don't take very long to defrost, so I can generally get away with pulling them out first thing in the morning, putting them on the bench for 45 minutes just to get that beginning going, and then sticking in the fridge for the rest of the day, and it's ready to cook. I sliced it up in chunks and then added it to the broth. I also pulled some broccoli stalks out of the fridge and julienned them up into sticks for the broth as well. As I said, I was still trying to figure out exactly how I was going to serve this. What I decided to do to extend the meal is to have it with udon noodles. So making it into like an udon noodle soup rather than just a soup on its own. I have the Coles shelf-stable udon noodles that we like. I buy a fair few of these because they're shelf stable, so they can be pulled out to use on a whim, like with this. So on sale they end up about $1.50 a packet, and we end up having to use 4 packets for a meal because each packet has 2 single serves in it. So we end up using 8 single serves or 4 packets of 2 single serves to feed us. So it's not the cheapest noodle in the world, definitely not when you compare it to like spaghetti. So like these noodles, say they're $1.50 each, and we're using 4 of them, it's $6 worth of noodles, whereas I can get away with 2 packets of dried spaghetti, which are only like 90 cents each, so $1.80 for that sort of a meal. So not the cheapest thing, but we don't buy them in the same quantities as we buy dry pasta either. I just put them into a hot pot of water, bring it back to the boil, and then remove them, agitating them gently to get them to fall apart. If I was going to use them for a stir fry here, I would put them in a colander and rinse under cold water, and maybe put a little bit of sesame oil on them just to stop them from sticking together until I was ready to stir fry them. However, because I'm using them as a soup, a bit of that starch is going to be beneficial, so I just used tongs and lifted the noodles out of the pot and into the bowl, and then ladled over the broth with the chicken and broccoli stalks over the top. So my version of an udon noodle soup with not at all the right flavours, I don't think, but it was tasty, and it dragged that soup out to be a full meal and a filling meal as well. For lunch the next day, I have no idea what I did. Don't have it filmed. For dinner the next night, we didn't have enough leftovers to make a whole meal, but I still wanted to use the leftovers of that lemon coconut soup. Obviously most of the chicken and the broccoli was taken out of it because the kids had scooped all that out. There was just a lot of broth behind, and I wanted to do something with it. This month I had bought a bunch of pre-made ravioli cheap to put in the freezer. A friend had told me that she bought it, froze it, and cooked it from frozen, and I thought, well, that again is something super simple to, as soon as I get it home, can go in the freezer and can be used later on in the month. And I really like ravioli. I it's just an awful lot of work to make. I really should do it. Like, I should spend a whole day, put a whole day aside and just make a whole lot of sheets of pastry into ravioli, flash freeze them and put them in the freezer. And maybe I need to do that at the end of the month, because then I've got the freezer space to flash freeze them before vacuum sealing them up, which would probably be the ideal. We have to have enough eggs to do it too. Anyway, I'd like to do it, but we'll see how we go. In the meantime, the frozen stuff, it's not great, but like the refrigerated stuff isn't great, but there's nothing particularly bad about it either. It's about $5 for 500 grams though, and we eat a kilo of it in a meal. I could possibly extend 500 grams out with a whole bunch of other stuff, but comfortably we need at least that kilo, and even that we have to extend out a little bit. In the meantime, I'll be buying this again the next shop because the kids really liked it and it was a really nice change. So I will continue to buy this like the boneless chickens for the moment as one of those slightly processed foods for us to make life easier. I had 2 different flavours of ravioli. There was a beef one and a chicken one. So I decided to do 2 different sauces for it. The chicken one in the chicken lemon soup and a red sauce for the beef one. I used a recipe for the Thermomix that had been recommended to me using sun-dried tomatoes, but with coconut cream and nutritional yeast instead of cheese and dairy cream. It ended up being very liquid sauce, probably a little too liquid for my taste, and I'll probably adapt it next time. But it was very tasty. I cooked the beef ravioli off in boiling water and added that to the tomato-based sauce, and I added the chicken ravioli directly into the lemon coconut soup to cook, and it will thicken the soup a little bit as well. With that tomato-based one, I probably could have blended it all up in the Thermomix, poured it in a pot, brought it to a boil, put the beef ravioli straight in there and cooked it in there, and that would have thickened it up a little bit too. So that might be one of the things that I do next time. The kids had some of each, or just the one they had the preference for, but they really do like the ravioli. Like, I pull that out of the freezer and they get excited. It's one of those things that I sit there and I go, I can make a meal that takes me hours and hours and hours, and they go, eh, and then I pull something like frozen ravioli out and they go, oh, look, dinner. For lunch the next day, we had one of the jars of butter chicken that I canned recently. So I wanted to show you guys how I prepare this one, because I mentioned that what we did when I canned it. So I ground up some natural cashews in my Tri-Best blender. This is just a little, it's like one of those little personal blenders, like the Ninjas and stuff, but this one's called a Tri-Best, and it's one that I've had for a long time. I got a couple of spare bases, half price at one point, so I've got a couple of spare bases in the cupboard as well. The finer you grind them, the less chance of crunchy bits, but it does turn into a butter, and if you take it too far, and it can be challenging to blend into the sauce if it's a butter. I don't really mind getting the bits of butter, and I don't really mind getting bits of crunch, so we just take it down to a meal, and that's fine. I emptied a jar into the pot to heat up, a jar of the butter chicken into a pot to heat up. I tend to use the small burner on the barbecue for this because it doesn't take too much to get it warmed through, and you want it to sit at a low simmer for like 10 minutes. They advise anything that you pull out of a jar on your shelf you should heat for 10 minutes. I don't follow that for everything, but the butter chicken is one that needs to be heated anyway, so it just sort of it becomes par for the course. We had some of the frozen roti in the freezer from Costco. I buy one of these packs every now and again because they're so good. But we'd normally just cook up a bunch of flatbreads. These bags are 30 of them for about $12, whereas I can buy like 12 kilos of flour and make, 15 odd batches of flatbreads for the same price. So they're very much a treat food, but it is awfully nice to have them there occasionally. And it means that Darryl generally cooks off that meal because I'm not making the flatbreads, which is kind of nice to have that ability. Each roti is raw dough and is packed separately between plastic sheets, so they cook up beautifully crispy and crunchy, but I can only fit one per pan as well when I'm cooking them off, so it takes a bit of time too. As I take them off, I scrunch them up so they stay flaky and crispy. If you leave them just flat when you take them off and you pile them up, they end up sort of chewy, like a tortilla, because they're steaming each other, whereas if you scrunch them all up, all that steam's released and they stay nice and crispy. Once the butter chicken has come up to a simmer for the 10 minutes or so, I add in the ground up cashews, a tin of coconut cream, and a drizzle of honey. Mixed it really well, brought it back to a simmer. We serve the butter chicken in small bowls with the breads on side. That's how we like to eat it. As I said when I was canning it, we have a tendency to just have a bowl of lots of sauce, a bit of chicken, and we use our breads as a dipper. We rarely serve it with rice because it's normally a lunch meal, but we have on occasion. And sometimes we might, if we're doing it with rice, we'd heat up 2 jars to have it as a meal sort of thing. The next meal I wanted to make, I wanted to use one of the pork roasts again. So this is like the second of 3 pork roasts that we bought this month. I decided to do a bit of a barbecue pulled pork first up. I cut up some onions into big chunks, placed them in the bottom of the pressure cooker, then put some water and vegeta in there as well. I opened up the pork roast and removed the rind like normal, leaving a little bit of fat on it but not an excessive amount on it for the pulled pork. I chunked it into large pieces and placed it into the pressure cooker. I probably overdid the quantity in the pressure cooker here, but I was already invested by the time I really took notice. So, you know, and the meat does shrink down when it's cooked, but I probably went a little over the max line here on that. I put a splash of apple cider vinegar in and then a jar of my apple butter barbecue sauce from the shelf. I also chunked up a couple of the big elephant garlic cloves to place on top as well. There are a lot of varying times listed online for pressure cooking pork, but most of them are for an Instant Pot, not a stovetop cooker, and it makes a difference in the cooking times. I went for about 75 minutes, prepared to take it a bit longer if needed, up to like 90, because 90 minutes gives me pulled pork in a jar when canning pork, so I know that it works at 90 and sometimes I just don't want to risk it not being done properly, but most websites list only like 40 odd minutes, and that's definitely not been enough in my experience with the stovetop pressure cooker, and especially not, I jam-packed this pressure cooker too. I did own a Philips style Instant Pot when we lived metro over like 6 years ago now, but I don't think I ever used it to its full extent because it was one of like many tools in my arsenal. We were on grid power and all that sort of thing. And I had so many small kids at the time. I do remember there being a brilliant chicken pasta dish that you threw everything in, including the raw dried pasta, raw chicken and everything, cooked for 5 minutes and you had a perfectly cooked meal. And that was amazing for when I'd fed all the kids, Darryl wasn't home till late, and I could throw that on and we'd have a meal on the table that quickly. But I didn't really use it much for a lot of other things. So I put the lid on it, let it come up to pressure, ran it for the 75 minutes, and then let it release naturally at the end, which takes quite a considerable amount of time as well. So when you're planning a cook for something like this, if you're going to release the pressure naturally, just remember that it takes quite a while for that pressure to release naturally as well. While that was going, I also used the rind over potatoes. So I have a few batches of rind from roasts that I've like cut the rind off to use the roast, but I haven't used the rind at the time in the freezer. There's probably 3 or 4 vacuum seal bags of rind in the freezer at the moment, so I didn't want to add more to it. I also had some of the small potatoes left from Costco, and they were starting to sprout a little bit, but were still nice and firm. So I did my usual and filled 2 trays with the potatoes, and then put the rind all cut into small pieces over the top. Sprayed it with some oil and sprinkled with salt and put it into the barbecue to cook. I had about a third of the roast left that didn't fit into that pressure cooker, and I already had some in the freezer and another one in the fridge, like some roast pieces in the freezer and a whole raw one in the fridge. So I thought I'd do the same as I did last video with the way we smoke or roast them, and coat it in mustard and then the seasoning mix and roast it while I was roasting the potatoes. I already had the barbecue going for the trays of potatoes, so I kind of felt like I may as well. We don't need all this meat for a meal, obviously. This is more than one meal's worth of food. But this is really nice if when it comes out of the barbecue, you wrap it in foil, you let it cool, and then you refrigerate it. And then you can slice it really nice and thin and have it on flatbreads or sandwiches or fried off with eggs for breakfast and stuff like that. So it'll just be a chunk of cold meat, a replacement for like ham or whatever, for us for the next few days. For dinner that night, to go with the barbecue pulled pork, I decided to make mac and cheese. I take advantage of mac and cheese night to make one with cow's milk and real cheese because I can, and it's one of my favourite things. But I also make a big batch of dairy-free one for everyone else to eat. And I do freeze the dairy-based one in portions for me to have at times when I'm cooking something for them that I really don't like. There's a couple of meals that they really like and I really don't like sweet potato gnocchi and things like that. If I make that for them, then I'll heat up like a mac and cheese. So the next time I make mac and cheese, I won't have to make my own. I'll just make theirs again. I use my Thermomix to make it, and again, it's one of those things that I make regularly that the Thermomix really shines for me. It's a throw everything in and turn it on, and when it plays me a tune, it's ready to go. I had some jars of pumpkin soup on the shelf that I had canned a while back, and nobody really liked as pumpkin soup. These were just chunks of pumpkin, onion, garlic, chicken stock, canned, and all you had to do is puree them up and you've got pumpkin soup. But people just didn't really reach for them, and they've been on the shelf for a little while, so I decided to use them in the mac and cheese sauce, a bit like I've used sweet potato previously. So I poured them into the Thermomix and pureed them up, so that they were basically liquid, and then added a tin of coconut cream as well. I used a fat. In this case, I'm still working through the extra container of Nuttelex, so I'm using that, but sometimes I use ghee or coconut oil if needed, and some flour, a bit of garlic, salt, smoked paprika, pepper, nutritional yeast, and mustard. Put the lid on, turn it on. The liquid with the pumpkin chunks is basically the chicken stock, so that works as a liquid for the sauce too. Turn it on, let it go, and it would play me a tune when it was ready. Once the sauce was thick and cooked, I put it into one of my Dutch ovens. I repeated the process with the Thermomix, but using milk and cheese and making a dairy-full cheese sauce for myself instead of dairy-free. I cooked the pasta off on the stove and then scooped it into the cheese sauces, mixing it through well. I do like to top my mac and cheese with seasoned breadcrumbs. I like that crispy texture on the top of them. So I had some focaccia in the freezer that was surplus, so I grabbed that out and ground it into rough crumbs in the Thermomix as well. Focaccia and bagels and stuff make great breadcrumbs because they're big and airy breadcrumbs, which I really like. I added in some of the seasoning mix that I use for the pork, so that has a bit of brown sugar, smoked paprika, salt, pepper, onion, garlic, that sort of thing in there, so it seasons the breadcrumbs really nicely. I sprinkle it really generously over the top of the pasta. I like to make it sort of like a crust almost on the top. I dollop some ghee on it, which will help it to crisp up in the oven because the fat will coat the breadcrumbs. You can use a bit of oil, and you can actually, when you're making the breadcrumbs, pour a little bit of oil into the Thermomix as well, and that will coat the crumbs as well and then help to crisp them up when it's baking. And I think I used chunks of real butter on mine because we got one of those like the sticks of butter in the hamper recently, and I don't use butter for much because we don't use much of dairy here unless I'm making something for myself. By this point, the pork had finished cooking and had released all its pressure naturally, so I pulled it all out of the pot. It was falling apart as I placed it in the roasting tray, so I called it good. There was a couple of pieces right in the middle that weren't as fall apart, obviously because I packed that pressure cooker just a little too heftily, but the majority of it all just fell apart as I was pulling it out of the pressure cooker. I think perhaps too that the apple butter barbecue, I would have been better off putting half in while it cooked and the other half in when I pulled it out. So that there was a bit more of a barbecue flavour, but we like it plain anyway. With regard to the potatoes that I had cooked, I don't need them for this meal either. A few had been eaten over the afternoon because, there's food. But after they'd cooled a bit, I put 24 each into Ziploc bags, being 3 each, so a good, side for a meal for 8 of us, and then put them in the freezer. My hope is being that because these are already cooked and they're coated in the lard, I can put them in the oven from frozen and they'll roast up like the frozen potato pieces you buy at the supermarket, because that's what they are. Like, when you buy par-cooked potatoes in the frozen section, like the roast pieces in the frozen section at the supermarket, they're par-cooked and they have some sort of fat on them. Either they're fried or whatever before you get them to help them crisp up in the oven. So that's the hope anyway. I haven't tried it yet. And this is what the roasted piece looked like. I'm just going to let it cool. I'll put it in a container in the fridge and slice it when cold into nice thin slices for us to munch on with lunches for the next few days. So that was the next few days of food. So I've got one more pork roast to get through, and then we move on to doing some of the more time-consuming and fun foods. I find like the end of the month, I have to put more effort in to make food that I want to eat, but also things have been par prepped and then they have to go through. I do have all that beef trim to work through as well, so that needs to be minced up and everything else too. So there's that work on as well, but we're getting there. So that was another couple of days of what we did with the food when we buy it on a 8-week sort of a span. Though this one's 9 weeks, it's going to be a challenge. We do have a hamper coming this weekend though, so that will help. But yeah, anyway, thanks for joining me again, guys, and I'll see you on the next video.